Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I yield my time to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Benz.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Mr. Secretary, before I start, I just want to talk briefly about what I heard earlier. One of my colleagues from across the aisle suggested that we Republicans were somehow manufacturing outrage. The phrase was right-wing outrage machine was the phrase that he used. I thought, are the folks across the aisle not outraged about the millions of people that are coming across the border under of course, your watch, that most of whom probably don't qualify for asylum? Don't you think that all of us should be outraged about the thousands dying from fentanyl that's coming across the border under your watch? And don't you think that we should be outraged about cartels moving into American cities on this side of the border under your watch? And don't you think we should be outraged about the billions of dollars the cartels are raising from the most unfortunate and vulnerable from Central America and other places under your watch? And don't you think we should be outraged about the hundreds dying in the desert? I mean, yeah, it's hard to argue, I think, that we're manufacturing outrage when we look at these incredible, sad things happening under your watch. Now, I want to go to how we can fix, perhaps, some of that which you've been talking about for the last couple of hours. Because you said earlier in response to a question from Congressman Issa that the USA is not, quote, alone in some of its infirmities in its immigration system. I'm just quoting from you. I scribbled it down quickly. Infirmities in our immigration system. Give us a couple.
I'm sorry.
Infirmities in our immigration system is how you put it when you were comparing our immigration system to others across the world. Just share two.
Let me give you one example in the economic arena. The market needs of our country, the economic needs of our country are not taken into account when we admit economic migrants. We have statutory caps, statutory limits on the number of people we can admit despite perhaps a greater need at a particular time. We do not calibrate the number according to need.
Right.
So for example,
I understand. I actually understand what you're saying. Forgive me for cutting you off, but it leads very, very nicely to how we might address immigration as a comprehensive system. And don't you think that politically, at least, a secure border is an essential prerequisite to any comprehensive solution? Because what you were just starting to talk about was one of the adjustments we might make to our visa systems. And by the way, I'm enthusiastic about trying to improve those visa systems. But I'll tell you this much. If I go back home to all of my constituents, as I'm going to be doing this Friday, and I'm going to be talking to them on Monday at a Chamber of Commerce meeting, guess what? They're outraged about the things I mentioned earlier. And they're not going to want to listen to me talk about the details that you just suggested. And so tell me, what can we do? Those infirmities, do they include anything when it comes to fixing the border so it works better?
yes.
Tell me.
So for example, Congressman, and one of the measures that we have taken to address this infirmity is to issue a regulation that empowers our asylum officers to make the ultimate asylum adjudication and shrink the time in between an encounter at the border and the ultimate asylum adjudication. That duration now, historically, has been 6+ years.
Thank you for your thoughts on it. Thank you for your thoughts on that, and I'd like to follow up with you on it, if you would. I'm serious. Share with me your thinking on that issue. Is it correct, as we heard, I've been to the border 3 times, and the folks down there suggest that the cartels are extracting between $3,000 and $5,000, maybe more, per person that presents illegally at the border. Is that true?
Yes, Congressman.
And so that would mean as the millions of people come in, we can multiply that times $4,000 or $5,000. Is that correct?
Congressman, that is correct, which is precisely why one of our efforts is to cut the smugglers out of the equation, because of the profits they make, because of their ruthlessness, because of their criminality. And so,
and forgive me for cutting you off, but I agreed to yield the balance of my time to the chair, Mr.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. Mr. Secretary, is the number of people removed been through adjudication?
Objection, Mr. Chairman. This isn't Mr. Bentz's time.
That's right.
It was yielded to Mr. Bentz.
I know, but I thought we could get away with it because it was an important question.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you can have the next person yield.
Mr. Chairman, I
We're
yield
going to
back.
do that. Yeah. All right. Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that was not done with any ill will. It
No,
was just out of procedure.
I knew that from the get-go.
Yes. Mr. Secretary, I know it's been a long day already. I want you to know that I'm here today to use my 5 minutes in support of a group of 250,000 plus young people in our country who are referred to as the documented dreamers. They're a too often forgotten population of talented young adults who are American in every way except on paper. And as I'm sure you're aware, since we've talked about them a few times, the documented dreamers are dependent children of long-term employment visa holders who are brought to the United States with documentation when their parents move here to work. And often these children come to the United States when they're still babies, but because they were not born here, they don't have citizenship or a real path to citizenship before they become 21. And while many of these young adults are in line for green cards with their parents, the backlog at USCIS is so long that they often face a decades-long wait. As a result, they risk having to self-deport when they turn 21 and age out of their dependent visas if they cannot find another status to stay in the United States legally. I have a bipartisan, bicameral bill to provide these children and young adults with a pathway to permanent residency protections for aging out of the immigration system. And I'm working hard to get that through the House and Senate. We got it through in 2 different forms last Congress through the House. However, today I want to hear about what your department is doing to protect these deserving young people and enable them to stay here. We've educated them using our tax dollars which their parents pay. They often self-deport to countries that compete with us at age 21 after having a few years of college. And so I'll get into at least one of my questions. In a 2014 decision on whether the Child Status Protection Act requires priority date for retention for children who have aged out of their visa, the Supreme Court deferred to agency interpretation of CSPA, which does not provide for a priority date retention for most individuals who turn 21 while waiting for green cards sought by their parents. However, Justice Kagan, writing for the plurality, emphasized that CSPA permits, not that it requires, this narrow interpretation of the statute that USCIS currently holds. Allowing documented dreamers to retain their original priority date and keep their place in line after they age out of their dependent visas could significantly improve the lives of this population. Why has USCIS not adopted a priority date retention for these individuals, given that the Supreme Court determined that the agency possesses this authority?
Congresswoman, I will consult with the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and get back to you. I'm not familiar with that precise issue.
Okay. I only have about a minute left. So when I met with the documented dreamers, which I do quite frequently because they have learned how to petition the government for redress of their grievances, I am struck by the love of this country and their eagerness to contribute to all of our welfare. And their stories are some of the most compelling that I've heard during my time in Congress. Does your department have any plans to protect these deserving young adults who have done everything right, been here legally, and are losing their ability to live in this country through no fault of their own?
Congresswoman, I share your concern for these individuals who have indeed contributed so much to this country and who know no other country but this one. I can assure you I will follow up with vigilance on the questions that you have posed and respond as promptly as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield my time to you.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Secretary, is the number greater than 0? Can you tell us that? The number of people who've been encountered on the border, over the 2 million number, encountered on the border, put in removal proceedings, adjudicated, and then removed. Is that number greater than 0?
Yes.
Is it greater than 100?
Yes.
Greater than 1,000?
Congressman, Mr. Chairman, forgive me. Mr. Chairman, as I have stated before, the data that you wish to have, we will provide to you as promptly as possible. What I don't want to do is misspeak when it comes to data. I do not want to be inaccurate.
And I could appreciate that, but we have a history where we've asked questions before in a hearing. You told us the same thing and you don't get it back to us. So we're trying to get as much as we can on the record in a public hearing. And you've now told me it's greater than 100, but you don't know if it's greater than 1,000 out of the 2-point-something million who've come to the country, been encountered and put in removal proceedings. So we know it's greater than 100. You say you're going to get back with us, but the history has been not too good on your part in getting us those answers.
Mr. Chairman, of course it's more than 1,000. But what I want to assure you of, because
is it
frankly,
more than 100,000?
Because quite frankly, Mr. Chairman, we have been cooperative with this.
No, you
committee.
haven't.
We have provided you with documents. We have provided you with data.
I can
have
keep
made
putting up the
briefings.
redacted documents, but you have not. I would yield back to the gentleman. I appreciate the time, so he can yield to another member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield my time to Mr. Johnson from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Mayorkas. In answer to my questions earlier today, you defined misinformation, and you acknowledged that CISA created in 2021 the Misinformation and Disinformation Committee. On April 27, 2022, you testified in the House Appropriations Committee that your department created then another agency or another subdivision, the Disinformation Governance Board, and you said under oath it was to combat misinformation ahead of the 2022 elections. Earlier this month, the federal court in the landmark case of Missouri v. Biden affirmed lengthy findings of fact to justify its preliminary injunction, and in the ruling found at page 94, the White House and your agency pressured and encouraged social media companies to suppress free speech that you determined, you and your employees determined to be misinformation. However, a couple of hours ago, when I asked you about this, you said under oath, we don't do that. Which time were you telling the truth, today or on April 27, 2022?
Congressman, we do not suppress free speech.
Did you or anyone working for you work with the social media companies prior to the 2022 election to pull things off the internet, suppress things off the internet that your folks determined to be false or misinformation?
Not to my knowledge, Congressman.
So you had no idea what the Misinformation and Disinformation Committee was doing during that period?
Congressman, I have answered that question previously. Let me assure you that we safeguard the First Amendment rights of individuals. That is what we do. Let me explain to you what the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency does.
I know all about CISA. What I'm concerned about is this committee and the dystopian Disinformation Governance Board that you set up and put Nina Jankowicz in charge of for about 3 weeks until the public blew their tops over that, and that suddenly disappeared and she resigned. How did you instruct Nina Jankowicz to discern what is misinformation and false information that the government should pull off the internet?
You are assuming facts that actually did not exist.
Tell me what the facts are. What guidance did you give her?
Congressman, the reality is that disinformation is a tool that adverse nation states use to undermine our democracy.
Okay.
4 adverse nation states include
No, hold on.
Korea.
Don't talk about foreign adversaries, because the court and the witnesses on your behalf in the court testifying under oath, different than what you're saying today, that they made no distinction between foreign people who put things on the internet and domestic voices. Do you disagree with that statement?
Congressman, can you share with me the context of that
It
statement?
would be awesome if you had read the federal court opinion that directly says that your agency is involved in the greatest cover-up of the free speech in U.S. history. But yeah, I'll tell you what the court says. It says people involved with your agency were meeting regularly with the social media platforms and giving them lists of persons and information that they said should be pulled off the internet, suppressed. That means turned down, volume censored so no one saw it. And the court said millions of free speech protected postings were not seen by the American people prior to the 2022 election because your employees subjectively determined that they shouldn't see it. That's the problem. And the idea that you would sit here in front of us and pretend like you don't know that was happening is just alarming. I'm out of words to describe how frustrated we are with you and your department. I'm out of time.
Gentleman from Oregon yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, Secretary Mayorkas. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate your patience and your testimony. Mr. Secretary, as you know, DHS is responsible for the public safety of the United States of America, and the men and the women at DHS work very hard every day so that Americans can pursue the freedoms of their everyday lives. And the mission of DHS is somewhat ubiquitous, be it at airports or disaster sites, that many overlook the fact that much of it is the same federal agency. In addition to these crucial areas, DHS has also been active in combating America's gun violence epidemic, which of course I am extremely invested in. It's an issue that is very important to me, as many other survivors around the country as well. Studies have shown that between 70 to 90% of weapons recovered from crime scenes in Mexico can be traced back to the United States of America. With weapons of war commercially available at low levels of individual scrutiny, gun traffickers have been taking immense advantage of our nation's gun laws, which are very lax, to arm drug cartels that also fuel a lot of organized crime. In addition, we have seen that payment for these gun traffickers has at times resulted in opioids that have helped our communities be torn apart as well. DHS has been swiftly, as you have mentioned over and over again today, combating these kind of illicit dealings through its joint efforts with the ATF-led Operation Southbound. Mr. Secretary, DHS has taken a collaborative approach with the ATF-led Operation Southbound. Can you tell us just a little bit more about this operation? I believe a lot of people don't really know that it exists, and DHS's role in it. We'd like to hear about that and the results of this operation.
Congressman, one of the concerns that law enforcement has is that the firearms that are in the hands of the transnational criminal organizations to the south of our border actually emanated from the United States. And we, in the Department of Homeland Security, through our Homeland Security investigations, working in collaboration, as you have noted, with other federal agencies, are conducting operations to interdict the flow of firearms outside from within the United States, external countries, and to prevent them from reaching the hands of criminals. And I would be very pleased, given the law enforcement sensitivity of the operations, to provide you with greater details about how we are accomplishing that objective.
Thank you so much. And with weapons of war, such as high-capacity automatic firearms, easily available in far greater quantities in the United States than ever before, can you illustrate how these firearms trafficking contributes to organized crime and gun violence in the United States?
Well, the trafficking in the guns themselves is a criminal activity that is a for-profit activity. So when the criminal organizations gain greater profits, they only tragically expand their criminality. In addition, the transnational criminal organizations that receive the weaponry from the United States conduct violent acts that impact individuals who seek to enter the United States, as well as Americans themselves.
Thank you. And can you tell us a little bit more about how the export of these weapons of war directly relate to the opioid crisis in our communities in the United States?
It is the criminality of these organizations is inextricably intertwined with one another. They conduct their operations by protecting themselves and addressing law enforcement through criminal means, and that includes violent acts. And those violent acts are perpetrated with firearms, and sometimes those firearms originate from the United States. It is a web of criminality, and we are unrelenting in our efforts to disrupt and dismantle every aspect of that criminality. I'm intensely proud of the men and women who dedicate their lives to that effort in the Department of Homeland Security and throughout our law enforcement partner community.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your dedication and those that serve right along with you in this manner. We really appreciate you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I have rarely been more gobsmacked by the lack of cooperation and information from a witness than I have by you today. It is truly appalling when you consider that lives are at stake, the lives of children being trafficked across this border, who are being sacrificed on an altar of radical policies being pushed by your department. You know, you talked about it. You threw out a good one-liner in your testimony about child sex trafficking, human smuggling. You know what does immense damage to our efforts to combat human trafficking, sex trafficking, child sex trafficking? A porous border. And your policies have directly led to that porous border, Mr. Secretary. It is ridiculous that I've had to sit here and listen to you and your denials, your deflections, your obfuscations. The mendacity that I am hearing from you is not just appalling to me, it is appalling to my constituents. And I echo the comments from across this country, members who represent people from across this country over the last 2 hours plus, really echoing their constituents and the frustration that they have actually shown and talked to them about. You know, back in April, we had a committee hearing where there was a witness, a whistleblower, who said that the U.S. federal government has essentially become a middleman in a multi-billion-dollar human trafficking operation targeting unaccompanied minors at the southern border. I'm sure that makes you upset. It sure as heck made me upset. But when U.S. Customs and Border Protection encounters 435 unaccompanied minors per day, drug cartels and traffickers exploiting 60% of these children in prostitution, forced labor, and child pornography. To make matters worse, in June, the Biden administration released 344 children to non-related adults in the United States, most of whom already had multiple children in their care. These children are prime targets for traffickers, for sex, or for labor. In fact, a February New York Times article published showing migrants found laboring in violation of child labor laws. Notably, half of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement's most wanted criminals for child trafficking, guess where they come from? Mexico. Imagine that. So when you actually take actions that reduce operational control of the border, these are actions that are taken in contradiction of your official duty to execute the laws enacted by Congress and your oath to support and defend the Constitution. You have abandoned the successful border policies of the previous administration. You've ignored laws requiring detention of certain aliens, reduced detention capacity, ended migrant protection protocols, halted border wall construction, diverted Border Patrol from law enforcement duties, encouraged en masse illegal immigration with the use of easily exploitable, credible fear processes, illegal expanded parole, reinstated catch and release, and provided illegal aliens valid work permits and public benefits during an economic downturn. You should be ashamed. More so, you should be held accountable. This committee will do just that, and I am committed to making that happen as well. And with that, I'm going to yield the remainder of my time to the chairman.